born in 1983 with osteogenesis imperfecta. I was diagnosed with type 2, which that type on the spectrum basically means you're not going to live. I grew up being told how long I would live. The last one they told me was 21 years. I'm 37. And I have been beholden to the welfare system my entire life. And what we find when we look at the details is that the return on the investment that's paid in doesn't come back to the community. Too much is taken out of the community and not enough is given back. And what I have found is, for my situations where it started, but then I became someone who directly advocates for others. So what I do and what I've been doing for about 6 years now is reaching out to individuals and identifying their problems, and if they're problems that I know how to address, I address them. It might take the state 18 months to approve funding for a wheelchair ramp so that someone can go home from a physical rehab or a nursing home or a disability home. They're all the same things. They're all prisoners. If you're not allowed to leave, you're a prisoner. The thing about that is I can get that done in a week or two by calling contractors, and it'll be free. Getting approval for a wheelchair in New York can take 18 months. And the situation that I landed in through that was that they would only approve a wheelchair that would detriment my health. It would have led to injury, it would have led to bed sores, because it would have landed me in the bed. And if you're familiar with disability issues, going to the bed is not a good thing. That's the inactivity, the not facilitating a lifestyle that is social, human, active, and fulfilling, that kills people more than disabilities do. And I do not give up. I ran away from home before I had my first wheelchair. I've never taken a step. I have one of those attitudes. I have one of those demeanors. I had parents that wanted to coddle me and quickly realized that they couldn't. I've been working all of my life without pay. I work for my household. I help produce our food. I help process, can, freeze, butcher, all of it. I've taught myself or learned from family. I direct the functions of raising the livestock or caring for the garden because I have all that knowledge. Sadly now I'm getting older and I can't do all that work. But there was a time when I was lifting 50-pound feed bags. And that shows you I am in a situation that's supposed to medically be hopeless. And yet because I had the tenacity and the drive, and I grew up in a poor family, right? I grew up in a poor family, so you have to put into the pot, the family pot. If you don't do that, you're a detriment. Now, they would have allowed me to do nothing, but I couldn't do that. I had to do something. So what you'll find with me is that no matter where I am or what I'm doing or what situation I'm in, I'm finding something I can do. I'm finding something that's a benefit, and that's what I'm trying to do. There's a lot of interesting things that people think about welfare. First thing is, most people rail against it because it is taken out of the community, and that's correct. I also rail against welfare, but what I can't stand is when someone is railing against welfare in front of me and then turns to me and says something like, well, it's okay, you deserve it. And I'm like, thanks, I deserve oppression. I'm not allowed to save over $4,000 of the money you're giving me monthly, and that's being robbed from my community. I'm not allowed to save that to benefit myself. I'm not allowed to save that to meet my own needs that the systems don't meet. And on that note, this wheelchair is crowdfunded. It was 20 years old last year. It had barely been used because it was one of those situations where somebody got a piece of equipment that either they couldn't use or they declined quicker than they expected. So 20 years old, unused. Imagine finding a 20-year-old car that's untouched. Yeah. And was a limited edition. I had the 100th one of this brand wheelchair off the line in, let's see, 1998. This is the 503rd. The model was improved based on my usage because it was a small family company. One of the people running the company had a disability. He was a paraplegic. And well, he was a paraplegic, but it was a high paraplegic, so he didn't really have much of his upper body. Don't you hate those definitions?
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a gentleman here earlier. And he was sick of not being in his community. He was sick of not being able to go where he wanted to go. And his family were aeronautics engineers for the Air Force. And they designed this wheelchair. It has a heat-tempered steel frame. It has an oil bath transaxle. It can push start it up 150. It can climb rural hills. It has an air horn, which I will not test with the microphone on. But it has a tilt recliners, prevents wounds, bed sores. Something again we were talking about earlier. And that's important, right? It seems like a lazy boy or a comfort feature, and yes, it makes you more comfortable, but it also prevents one of the most easily preventable problems for those with disabilities, which is wounds, open sores. In the 1970s, we had a pretty good handle on wound care. The biggest part of wound care is teaching people who are going to have that problem to stay clean and dry. The other big part of that is helping those who can't do it themselves to do it. Our facilities are understaffed, our workers are underpaid, everything is sapped from the system. Workers roll over, they never get the experience, they never learn because they don't stay in the job. And now we have an increase in bed sore death. I'm going to talk about William Peace for a minute. He was a disability advocate out of Colorado, and he died a few years ago of bed sores while advocating against the decline of wound care, which treats bed sores, since the ACA rolled through. When the ACA rolled through, I watched a good number of my fellow advocates with disabilities disappear. That means that they either died for lack of care or they were stuck in an institution where today, most of that advocacy is done by people with disabilities is online. So imagine that if they're still alive, they don't have internet access. They don't even have that voice. And why don't they have internet access? Rules. When you're in a facility, there's rules. I grew up around the Oxford Veterans Home in Shenango County. I knew a gentleman by the name of Jim Daly. I only met him a couple times. My mother actually knew him better. She worked there. He was a veteran without the use of his life. He had the words, "No bar, too far," tattooed across his knees. And he was kind of a rougher personality. He liked to drink. He even liked to do drugs. Libertarians, who cares? But think about this, he's in a facility where he's not allowed to leave. He's got a tag on him that sets off an alarm when he goes through a door. The doors get locked, and he's supervised, he's not supposed to leave. This gentleman would escape without his wheelchair and go to the bar. That's tenacity, right? He didn't give up. And what we find is a lot of people do actually give up. Society, thanks to the systems instilled in us by our government, tells us that those of us with disabilities are not supposed to do things. And we have this strange divide. This gentleman here, we had this conversation, right? The optics for your disability are different than the optics for mine, right? When people see you, you're in a manual chair, you're doing the work, you can play sports, and so you don't get that, do you? Do people tell you you can't do things?
Not usually, probably not as much as you.
Right, and there's a disparity there, right? Because people think if you're not normal, you're different. But what's normal, right? We're humans, nothing is normal. And I don't like the divides in the disability community. I run into this as an advocate, and I pointed it out. I apologize for using it as a prompt. But we do have this divide, and there shouldn't be a divide. Because at the age 65, retirement age, 42.8% of all Americans have a diagnosed disability. Our government makes policy based on not what you need, based on what they need. Who's going to pay them? My governor in New York cut $75 million from the CDPAP program, which provides home care, and is trying to suppress the nursing home transition and diversion waiver, which helps keep people in their communities, in their homes, with their families, with the people who care about them. That's important, right? We call it health care, right? But we put these people in situations where people who don't know them, oftentimes people who don't care about them, or their jobs are so stressful that they lose the ability to care because they still need that paycheck. And they still have to provide for their own. They still have to feed their children, pay their fucking taxes. And, you know, they get locked into this situation where they have to separate their emotions from their job. And when you separate your emotions from your job, and your job is caring for people, that takes the care out of healthcare. And that's the result of our government action. In New York, on paper, we have an office for advocacy for those with disabilities, which today does include the elderly and addicts. As a disability advocate with a more obvious disability that I was born with, I have a lot of trouble working with the elder groups in my county and district because they don't want the disability label. Why don't they want the disability label? Because they've been in the community, they've been in the systems, they paid their taxes, they have a little more understanding of how it works, and they know that once you get that label, you are seen as less. You are seen as something easy to throw away. And there's a few more things I can talk about that are really going to, they're hard for me to think about. So, there have been studies done, anonymous surveys versus surveys you have to put your name on. When it comes to abuse, if you have to put your name down, only 1 out of 10 people with disabilities will admit to being abused. If it's anonymous, 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 report rape, physical abuse, theft, usury, you name it. And why don't they report it? Why don't they report it? Because these systems do not give anonymity, particularly when you're in a home. Everybody whispers, everybody knows, workers talk, so if you report, everybody knows you reported it. And you're beholden to that same caregiver, usually thanks to unions. I'm not entirely against unions, but we don't like unions to protect bad behavior, do we? So, what am I getting at here? Our systems of welfare perpetrate the imagery that we can't do, that we have less value, that we're incapable, that we shouldn't try, that all we need are pills to sedate us and that TV remote to keep us busy. And I'm not that kind of guy. I don't know, is anybody here a TV buff? Do you spend most of your time watching TV? Does that make you feel good? Anybody? No. I like TV because I go through periods of injury, and when I can't move, it is entertaining enough to keep me sane. Otherwise, if I can move, if my wheelchair works, if my body's not too badly broken, I am doing. TV is it's the ultimate opiate, in my opinion. And this perception that putting people in a crowded facility run by the state with poor standards, poor diet, poor facilities, poor workers who are themselves oppressed and underpaid. How is that going to help? What do you get out of that? You're removed from your community. There's often rules about when and whether your family can visit you. You're not allowed to leave as you choose. Maybe there's certain situations of disability where that's pertinent. You know, if it's behavioral or cognitive, sometimes you have to help them by not letting them do things they probably shouldn't do. But that goes too far. Why are we not letting us have jobs? Why are we removing the so-called welfare because we have a job? And here's the situation that creates. In New York, SSI is a qualifier for these healthcare programs, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is. When you lose enough SSI from working, you lose your qualification for healthcare. And there's a gap. There's a gap between the income you can get through a few years of work and the income you can get or the job you can get with private insurance that will cover your medical needs. And in that gap, most people will die. That's insane. You live on welfare or die. But there's a solution, right? I'm being very depressing, right? Anybody else feels that? So there's a solution. I was talking about this wheelchair. It's crowdfunded. It's 20 years old. Everyone involved in crowdfunding it was either already a libertarian or became a libertarian or is now at least supporting libertarians in New York. And actually, there's only 2 who are not on the registration rolls. And that's amazing. So from my perspective, I went from a situation of preparing to go to the bed. I was automating my lights with the new technology we have these days. I automated my TV so that I can control it by voice, because if I'm going to be stuck in bed all day, I want to be active. I made my computer remote with wireless features. But I was splitting my funds 50-50. 50% of it went to being prepared to go into the bed, and the other 50% went to repairing the old chair. And that chair is not yet repaired because we found this one. And in repairing this chair, I was hunting for parts. I have a lot of parts because I kept getting the same chair over and over again, and you don't throw that away if you know what you're doing. Nobody likes to wait 6 months for a tire. If you're retiring a chair and it's got good tires on it, you keep those tires. The system will try to force you to buy new ones, by the way. Wheelchairs are covered for up to 5 years of life. After that, they will not repair them. You are forced to buy one new through the system. Basically, taxpayers are forced to buy one. If I'm moving too much, shout at me. I don't sit still. So, the interesting thing here is it's very important for a cushion on a wheelchair to be antimicrobial and wick away moisture, as again, I was talking about bed sores earlier. To get this cushion through the systems that I'm beholden to, I have never seen the price tag on that, because they always send you that nice piece of mail that tells you how much money they spent on you. I've never seen that price tag for less than $1,200 for a cushion. I was in a situation with a new crowdfunded wheelchair, and I needed a new cushion. The rating for antimicrobial on the fabric is 5 years. Remember, I told you the wheelchairs, they force you to replace them after 5 years. In fact, they not only force you to replace one after 5 years rather than repair it, but they often won't give you a new cushion if it's still working. So if you want to avoid bed sores, you get a new wheelchair. That's a forced market, again. That's forcing the taxpayers to pay for things that we don't need to be paying for. I sourced the material for this cushion. I sourced the foam, I sourced the fabric, I got it direct from the manufacturer, and it cost me all of $30. Same material, same manufacturers involved. The only part of it that I didn't pay for was the sewing on the fabric. I have a large family with a lot of talents. And that's important too, right? Geez, don't do that. When we talk about suppressing our community's taxes and through a poor return on these subsidized projects, whether you're talking about healthcare or parks or roads, which are shit in New York, by the way. Don't drive on the roads in New York. Stay out if you can. Unless you're a libertarian and you want to move into a district and vote for me. I'm going to go back to our conversation earlier. If you're making an investment and you get a poor return, do you keep making the same investment? I mean, when I'm talking to people who try to tell me that welfare works, that it's necessary, that it helps me, I say, okay, I'll give you $2 for every $10 bill you got. Because a lot of these programs for individuals with disabilities actually waste 80% of the funds earmarked. In fact, somebody earlier told me they were from Philadelphia. I don't think they made it. In Philly, there was a program for specifically paraplegics. They never advertised it. It cost millions of dollars. They never helped a single person. And that is common. That is common. You are paying for nothing. That's a bad investment. Why are we investing in systems that detriment our communities? And on to that point, right? Well, how else are you going to get help? Through your communities, through being seen, known, loved, heard by your neighbors, your family, random strangers, right? A long time ago, and this practice ended, I think, officially in the early 80s, maybe the late 70s. The state ran institutions that we now know as snake pits. They were called snake pits because what they did was they threw everyone with a disability into a large room with no care. We're talking no clothing, rotten food, no cleanliness. You can look this up. Google disability snake pits if you have a strong stomach. If you don't, don't. And what we've gone to now with these institutions, which are equally as forced, is there may be technically better care in so far as diet and cleanliness, but most of them who end up there are sequestered to their room. There is no interaction other than the very brief time that the staff has with them to help them, which usually is not enough time because they don't employ enough staff, they don't pay them well enough, they're hurried, they're not providing care. If you let communities do it, they do it better, and I am living proof of that. I could be dead so many times I can't even remember them all to tell you. I was born with 25 fractures, including my skull. I have shattered my skull on at least 2 more occasions. It's hard to remember all of them. I've had over 1,000 fractures by the time I was 16. I carried my books with my broken arms. Why? Because I chose to. And what we do is we teach, actually, I'm going to go back to our conversation again. We teach parents to tell their children who have disabilities that they can't do things. My parents tried to do that. Didn't work. And that's, again, it comes from the optics of having welfare as a government system. It's a message. It's subconscious. We're telling people you can't survive without us. You can't do it without us. You can't live without detrimenting your community. And if you have the mind to figure out how this all works, how does that make you feel? Imagine if your very life told you you were a detriment to your community because of the way your government worked. That's depressing. Now, what are the solutions, right? We're getting to that. Crowdfunding a wheelchair. It's 20 years old. It's crowdfunded. It's upcycled. It was saved from the dump, essentially. What happens with the equipment is they either try to sell it once and it goes to the dump, or they'll donate it to a closet, which will hold on to it for so long. They don't have the resources to try and place it properly with those who need it. And after a while, they see it as taking up too much space, and again, to the dump. My own services coordinator, he's routinely pissed off over what she's not allowed to do to help. She's routinely pissed off over the fact that the systems for approval for things that are very obviously necessary fail, and she's not allowed to find a voluntary option. She recently tried to find a piece of equipment for a gentleman in his 80s, suffering, who was forced to sleep either on the floor or in his wheelchair. And if have you ever sat in a chair to sleep, a regular chair, and tried to do that night after night after night after night, or on the floor? It's not comfortable. It's not happiness. It's suffering. State regulations dictate that the liability of the company that she works for means she's not allowed to give him a free piece of equipment. She's not even allowed to make that connection. Why? Why would the government stop us from helping each other? Well, I can tell you why. Healthcare is a good third of our economy. And slowly but surely, and then with a quick blow with the ACA, the government has taken over 1/3 of our economy through healthcare. What happens to countries who take over 1/3 or more of their economy? Their economy tanks. Where are we now? Our economy is declining. We may be the richest country in the nation, but our citizens are not. And the richest country, it's the richest country in the world. Now, what does that tell us? Who does the better job of caring? We call it health care. Who does a better job of caring? People sitting on their thrones in the capitals, or your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones. Every piece of disability equipment that I use currently was either crowdfunded, or sourced cheaply, or donated, or built by people I know, people who care. And that's despite the level of oppression that removes our ability to show our caring, right? To donate money becomes harder when you're paying more taxes. To donate your time becomes harder when you're forced to work 40, 60, 80 hours a week to survive. You don't have time to help your community. So let's talk about libertarianism a little bit here. I often get branded as some kind of social justice warrior, that I'm seeking a specific group of people to help. I'm not. Remember, 42.8% by age 65 have a disability. As you age, that percentage goes up. Unless you die suddenly, you live a period of time with a disability. That is everyone. This is an everyone issue. There is no demographic this does not cross. And libertarians should be talking about this. We should be seeking this. We should be reaching out to the disability community, the disability advocates. We should be explaining our solutions. We should be explaining the government waste. We should be explaining how these programs are not done out of caring. We vote for them out of caring often enough, right? But they're not actually practiced out of caring. And we cannot call it health care if there is no caring. My own doctor, when I was younger, decided to break my leg with his hands because he took an x-ray that was not appropriately placed, did not show the fracture. My leg was bowed before it broke. I had set it myself. 2 weeks later, I went in to make sure it was good. But without taking another x-ray, he made his assumption. He took his power. He had immunity because in New York, if you're a child and you're disabled, you have 2 strikes against you regarding liability for your healthcare professionals or anything else that happens. You are worth less in the eyes of the courts. And so people who are aware of this take liberties. I was held down. My mother was held down. I was screaming expletive after expletive and taking swings. And he grabbed my leg and he broke both bones just above the ankle, thinking he was doing the right thing, but without knowing, and he didn't listen. Right? We are individuals. We understand our own situations. I do not recommend anybody in this room sets their own broken bone, but I will never let anybody else set mine. That's because I have the experience. I have the ability to keep calm. I know how to do it. Don't ever gain that experience, but know your own situation. If you end up in a disability situation, learn it, know it. Do your own research. Ask more than one doctor. Always get a second and third opinion if you're able. Never, ever, ever take anything anyone tells you as gospel. It is not. I am supposed to be dead dozens of times, and I am still here because I didn't quit. As I said earlier, Thomas Daniel Queter, never quitter, and rarely quieter, here I am talking. I'm going to pause here to see if anybody has anything they want to say, any questions? Yes?
How much does one of the wheelchairs cost in a used state?
In a used state, that's variable. But this one was $4,000. At the time it was sold, if it had been sold to the system, I'm pretty sure this one was private because I'm familiar with the family. They had money and they probably would have just purchased it. But through the system, this chair is a $65,000 chair. Think about that. What are you going to buy for $65,000? Should this wheelchair cost $65,000? Absolutely not. I can tell you that the family that designed it and sold it didn't want it to cost $65,000. But to get it approved to be sold through systems to people who need them, they had to jump the hoops. They had to follow the regulations. They had to pay the fee. Ridiculous. Every other model of wheelchair I've ever had has done something terrible to nearly kill me. I've had them take off at full speed, run me in the wall. That leg I was talking about broken, that's what happened. The chair took off at full speed and ran me in the door frame and didn't stop until I managed to pull the plug. It wasn't on, there was no buttons. Never pushed, nothing was touched. But it took off on its own because, we have these expensive regulations to make sure they're safe. And another fun fact is that wheelchairs routinely make the top 30 most dangerous consumer goods out there. Guns do not. They're regulated. Why are they regulated? Because the healthcare system is a monopoly. I had a wheelchair. It went through 3 companies to be finished with customization and the chassis and the seating system. I'll get to you in a second. And all 3 of those companies were owned by the same company, Sunrise Medical. They still exist. They still own most of the wheelchair companies that are providing for in this country. There are becoming more options. You see these track chairs coming out, that's great. They're awesome. I can't use them, but I appreciate that those who can has that option. For $15,000, you can purchase a track chair that will take you quite literally anywhere. And that's a pre-market solution. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, if you live on services, you can only save for it. So, where are we there? Crowdfunding. If you have the ability to donate $10, if you have the ability to start a fundraiser for someone you know is in need, that's what you can do as a libertarian. You can do the work. You can be the help. You can encourage communities to help those in need. It does not take much. I do it all the time, and I've done it without leaving my home. Anyone who can use Google can help someone with a disability.
Yeah, you basically answered my question because I was wondering, what your thoughts on how to privatize this industry. I mean, is it going to take an Elon Musk to create a SpaceX?
And, I was actually heckling Elon Musk on Twitter last year to make a better power wheelchair. I mean, he can make these electric cars, and he can make these power walls and spaceships. And somebody heckled him into making a flamethrower. But better wheelchairs, oh my God, that would be too hard. So, as libertarians, we want free market solutions. Let's face it, we all have that bottom hard line that we're seeking, but we're not going to get there instantly. We can't. In New York, what I have to do if I win my race is seek opt-out solutions. All right, we're not going to be able to end the taxation. If we make these quick, hard changes that a lot of libertarians want, there's going to be casualties. Any hard-moving policy like the ACA causes casualties of life, happiness, forces suffering. Policy should never, ever be an abrupt change when you're dealing with someone's life or physical ability or happiness in general. Hard policy changes, for the most part, are not going to be effective, and they're going to do more damage and give them more reason to come back with more regulation, more welfare, and more control. So in my mind, the way to do this is to find all of these individual programs, for which in my state there are many, and offer these opt-out situations. So if the program is willing to fund you to a certain level, but has all these requirements and itemizations, why not have an opt-out situation for those who choose to? If I have to compromise to the point of a system that approves the individuals who can get that, I might, but I don't like that. Everybody can find their own solutions better, and I would prefer to just give that opt-out situation, give them the money. We talk about this with housing, government housing. Give them the deeds. Let it be theirs. Let them take care of it. Well, when it comes to health care, until we can actually work at rolling back these taxes and rolling everything back the way we all want them, we need to show that it can work. And an opt-out situation allows those who are in the most need, those who have the best optics if they do better, to show off, right? Look at me. I mean, I show off by existing, right? If we give them an opportunity and they take it and people see them doing better for it, more people will choose it, and we will literally give people the choice to say hell no to welfare. Think about that. The people who are beholden to it, the people who are suffering because of it, if we give them opt-out situations, opt-out options, look at me talk, then enough of them will be in situations where they're not getting what they need, and will realize that there's another option and that they can try, and enough of them will succeed, and enough of them will become visible. They will return to their communities, they will be known and seen as success stories, and the libertarian option will be raised to the top. It will be something that everyone wants. Think about Social Security, right? We pay in for that security. Nobody ever gets back what they pay in. In New York, over $8 billion has been stolen from the Social Security situation by both governors named Cuomo. Nobody gets back what they pay in. Imagine if instead of paying into Social Security, you just kept the money. Well, imagine if our welfare system, instead of deciding who gets what, just says, well, okay, this is the average amount that we pay for someone that we deem your situation to be, and so we're going to give you the money to find your own solutions. If they would give me $19,000, I would design and build my own wheelchair that could be better than this one. I know fabricators, I know mechanics, I know engineers. I can get that done. I'm already having parts made for this model. I already know how to get the motors rebuilt. I know how to source the batteries outside the system, which is another interesting item to talk about. Because wheelchair batteries, which are the same as forklift batteries in my case, through the system, $2,400 for a set, $2,400. From Ron Mickle in Maryland, New York, neighboring county of Otsego, who runs a battery and lubricant supply business, $560, less than a quarter of the price. Better batteries, same battery, better quality. They don't sit on the shelf. They don't get recycled, which lowers their output in the range. Instead of having a battery that goes bad in 6 months, I have a battery that goes bad in 2 to 3 years. 6 months, $2,400, 2 to 3 years, $560. Same battery, same brand, same manufacturer, probably came off the line right next to each other. What are they doing that makes that difference? They're not caring. They're not recycling their supply and their stock. It's sitting there until the battery goes bad. They're actually, I've had this happen to me. There's generation stickers on these batteries. So when they refurb the battery, they put a new sticker on and they're coated. What I found is that you will get a brand new generation sticker on top of a very old 3rd or 4th generation sticker. That's a racket. And that's allowed by the government. You can be denied the equipment you need by an intermediary company called a provider, which you have to go through. The state requires them where I'm from. You can be denied based on the fact that they will not profit. And that's okay. They're a business. They're there to profit. However, they're a business that sucks on the tax dollar. I do not consider that to be a business. That is just a leech. The people who work there, they don't think that. They're trying to help. In fact, I know people who work in the equipment providing industry who quit over the ACA because they were forced into a cubicle, they were forced to hurry, they were forced to not provide what works, they were forced to do things that were not caring, they cared, they realized what was going on, and they left. They walked away because they would not be beholden to systems like that. And that's admirable. I mean, it's a shame that people have to choose to stop helping people, but they also chose to stop helping a system that robs their communities and kills their neighbors. Does anybody else have any other questions before I go on? Because I will talk forever.
Only, you may cover it, but what about people that are actually not capable of doing the thing they're saying themselves?
Again, back to the community.
Right.
Actually, there's 2 homes in my own very tiny town of Mount Upton. It's like a quarter of a mile by an eighth of a mile, 2 main roads. And we have side streets, but you can only be on them for 5 minutes before you're back on the main road. And that's a system that kind of works, except for, again, you're in the investment situation, a poor return on the taxes paid into it. What this is it's mother and daughter, they both own a house, and they're allowed through the systems to take in so many patients, right? And luckily that is capped at a number that is low, so they get better care. And that is something that can be done and should be done more. Again, if you're a libertarian living in a system that is this messed up and this terrible, that is something you can do within the system that actually works for a libertarian ideal. It's not perfect, but it's a step. And what these very nice ladies do, I'm trying to remember their names. Terrible with names, but they care for a handful of individuals with disabilities. They do manage the welfare.
So, sorry guys, but this is 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I've been that guy, don't worry about it. So what that does is provides better care for the buck, right? When you buy in bulk, you get a better price. When you let the government buy in bulk, you get a worse price, but when you let an individual buy in bulk, you get a better price. And what I mean by in bulk, what they're buying is lifestyle, health care. These individuals are in the community. These individuals can walk to the store. They can take the bus. They can utilize other public facilities. They have people there who care about them. It's not perfect. It's still wasteful through the taxation system, but it is better than an institution. I mean, imagine, look at these walls in this room. This is an institution, right? This is a county building. Would you want to be surrounded by this day in, day out, 24 hours a day? Would you want to not be allowed to go outside? Would you not want to see trees, grass, often not be allowed to have pets? Whatever it is you think you would like in life, you likely will not have that in an institution. And, you know, that might be fine and good for those of us, not myself, who think that prison is necessary for prisoners. But why are we imprisoning people with disabilities? Why are we imprisoning people who have Down syndrome? Why are we imprisoning people like myself? Why are we imprisoning the elderly? Why are we stripping them of their rights? And actually, I'm going to go into another topic here. If you turn 65, you sell your family home because your children have moved out, and you choose to buy a smaller home with a mortgage that you can afford on your Social Security, and you fall, and you break your hip, and you don't have a nest egg, and you're beholden to Medicaid, and your medical bills get high enough, they take your home. If you owe $20,000 and your home is worth $250,000, they take your home, they force you into a state institution, they turn you into a source of profit, and they do not give you the difference in the value of that home. Often, these homes are sold for half price to somebody's friend, and the rest of the money is kept by the government. How is that charity? How is that welfare? How is that helping? There is a way to avoid this. And it comes down to a nice little word. It sounds good. Divest. If you divest your property, if you divest your savings, you get to keep it. Well, no, you don't. Divesting means you give it away. You give it to your children. Not everybody has a great relationship with their children. Not everybody in their current systems can trust their children to give them the care they need. In New York, it's very common because the children have left. They live in another state. They found a lower tax bracket in another state. They found a lower tax burden in another state. They found more freedom in another state. And so in New York, the majority of our population is not young, it is elderly. And through this COVID-19 situation, what we saw was that the last people that our governor and our state legislature protected were the elderly. So, divest. Who's got a phone? Who's got their phone? You do. Google it. D-I-V-E-S-T. Find the definition.
Deprive someone with power, rights, or possessions.
Power, rights, possession. You can also find a definition that strips you of your clothing. It leaves you naked, vulnerable, helpless, without power. You have no property. You have no financial stability. You often end up giving away power of attorney, which means you have no choice. And in the UK, again, through the COVID-19 situation, we are seeing doctors forge DNRs for the disabled. New York is one of, I think, 7 or 8 states that have deprioritized care for the disabled during this pandemic. They have deprioritized treating those with disabilities during this pandemic. Think about that. There's an interesting fact here. It's not COVID, I smoke. So when we look back through history and we judge other societies that have come and gone, and Rome is a good example, we judge them by how they treated those who were at the bottom, those who had the most struggles, those who had the most hardships, how those people were treated. That's how we judge these societies. How do we want our society to be judged? How do we want the United States of America to be judged in 100 years? If it's going to collapse and be gone, how do we want it to be judged? What are we going to do about that? What do you want your legacy to be? Do you want to be in the legacy of a two-party voter that supports systems that hurt those at the bottom? So maybe I'm a social justice warrior, but it's not for a group of people. It's for everyone. Every last person can benefit by paying attention to what they're doing to healthcare by voting for those who do not seek more power. When you take power over healthcare, you take away an individual's power to make their own decisions. And that's where we see things happen that are wrong. There is a slogan that I found and loved that came from the disability advocacy community, which is largely people with disabilities. The slogan is, and you're going to love this because you're libertarians, never for me without me. And it stems from people who, they had minds, but they had communication issues. What would happen is they'd get shuffled through the doctor and they wouldn't bother finding the people who helped them communicate. There might have been a piece of equipment they needed, maybe they needed a sign language interpreter, and they wouldn't do that. And because they didn't do that, they made decisions for them without them. And this led to a lot of horrible things that I'm not going to describe, but it's not correct. It's not the right way to go about things. And the interesting thing about this slogan is while it started in healthcare, right? It started in what you go through at the doctor. It grew. It's in people's homes. I can open that door, don't do it for me, right? So I'm going to put one thing out here. If you want to help someone with a disability, ask them first if they need help. When you take away their right to do something by doing it for them, you impede their ability to grow. Personally, I need to do everything I can. My situation means that I have to move, I have to do. If I stop, I grow weak. And the weaker I get, the more help I need, and we all know that direction, right? That's not a good thing. So, solutions, again, what is the solution? The solution, as libertarians, is to actually reach out and do something, one-on-one. My advocacy has helped people attain things they didn't think they could get. In Florida, I'm from New York, in Missouri, in Texas, in Chicago, in the UK, in Australia. All I do is sit on the computer and look for problems that I know I can address or that I know I can research to address. And it's simple. It's simple. All you have to do is connect people with the people they need. You need to give them their community back. You need to show them that if you reach out people care. And there's an interesting factor I'm going to go into here. Most people with disabilities have trouble asking for help. That was one of the hardest things for me to learn. I had an argument with the people who wanted to crowdfund this wheelchair because I didn't feel deserving. Because the systems at play made me not feel deserving. People like to tout the ADA. I can't stand the ADA because anybody who has to follow it is perfectly willing to edit it and hand you a false copy. It cannot be enforced unless you have the money to enforce it through the law. So what good does the ADA do? It broke my fingers several times. Because it's just a piece of paper. A piece of paper is not caring. Caring happens by being known and being seen. Remember I was talking about snake pits? What would happen from largely the 40s to the 70s and early 80s is if you were born with a severe disability, and I'm running over time, a social worker might come around to your parents at birth. This happened to me. The state tried to steal me from my parents. My mother got the nickname of Pitbull because of how voracious she was. When that occurred, I won't go into the details, but it did not follow the net. Although maybe self-defense is a good way to look at that. And there was a time when communities saw people with disabilities disappear. They were taken by the government. And when you're being raised in a community, when you're a child growing up and this is what you see, that teaches you that there must be something bad, there must be something to stay away from. It's subconscious, it's not direct, nobody tells you that, but that is the mindset. The hardest people I have to talk to usually are the elderly because they grew up through that generation. And that makes them the hardest people to help. So, again, solutions. It's simple. It's simple. You take the time, you take the resources that you have. It doesn't matter how limited they are. It's more valuable than anything that comes from the government. It's more valuable than any welfare program. And we need to support politicians that support opt-out programs, opt-out situations. Let's let them have that funding, but let's let them spend it their way. Let's remove the waste by removing the middlemen. Well, let's give the person who needs wheelchair that needs specific modifications or additional features. Let's give them the option to seek that, and let's deregulate a bit, right? Again, why does this wheelchair have to cost $65,000 when the system pays for it? I can get it repaired. I can get pretty severe breakdowns repaired for less than $1,000. I can get parts made very, very cheaply, sometimes free. It's good to know fabricators. And I know I'm talking over my time, but I started late. I'm going to wrap this up and I'm going to ask again, do you have any more questions? Is there anything you want?
You were talking about the prices. Just one of the things from the military side, just to add to that a little bit. The VA automatically sets that anything, I could be wrong about the limit, but I believe it was $3,500, goes through a fast track approval process. Anything below that amount, anything above has a longer process. So you'll find that a lot of the chairs that Quickie and some of these other brands make are just under $3,500. So it's setting that price based on VA, setting its own prices.
Right. And in my experience, power chairs are not worth that set. Right now, they'll pay $19,000 for something that will get you over the threshold of reborn. So the market control, that's what that's about. The market is controlled through regulation. Those regulations are lobbied for by the bigger companies. Bigger companies own the smaller companies. They invest in insurance companies who invest in them. And they all invest in politicians. So where's the freedom in that? Where are you finding your ability to pursue life and happiness? Where are you finding the ability to innovate, to come up with new ideas when the market is so controlled? Come up with better solutions. You're not. It's not there. It can't be done. Not in today's system. We need to make that easier to do. And on that note, unless anybody else has anything, I am going to shut up.
So, for my campaign sake, anybody have any